Jamie Dimon is the CEO of America's largest and most successful bank, JP Chase.
Hey, how are
So
you?
nice to see you.
Good to see
Our
you.
editor-in-chief, Zanny Minton-Beddoes, sat down for an exclusive interview.
Jamie Dimon, thank you so much for joining The Economist.
We hear Dimon's view on the banking crisis, Bidenomics, and US-China relations.
You have now run JP Chase, America's most successful, biggest bank for 18 years. You played a big role in 2008 in the global financial crisis. You've played a big role this year. So let's start with the banking system. Is the financial crisis of 23 over?
For the most part. First of all, I'm thrilled to be here. You know how much I respect The Economist and the work you all do. I think it's among the best in the world in journalism. I call it a mini crisis. It was nothing like 08 or 09. There was too much leverage in the system. There wasn't too much leverage this time. There's plenty of capital. We had $1 trillion in mortgage problems last time. There's no thing here. There's a problem in plain sight, which is some interest rate exposure, some of these uninsured deposits that kind of ran like a flock of birds, and it's over for now. I think that most of it's been handled, and I think the only but I'd put in there is rates go up from here, and they might. It can rear its ugly head again, and I'm hoping that banks and other financial institutions are taking the time to think through what are their interest rate exposures if the whole yield curve goes to 6% or even 7%, can they handle it?
So it's over for now, but how well handled was it?
Look, I think when you do a post-mortem on what happened with Silicon Valley Bank and some of these other banks and what regulators could have done better or something like that, we could have done a lot of things better. And I'm not casting stone. I think that's going to always be true when you have a problem. You should analyze what happened. I'm also hoping that regulators don't overreact to what happened. I mean, we had a couple of failures and they put in millions of different new rules. They should be very thoughtful in how they put rules in place and what they're trying to accomplish. And what I urge them to do is have a forethought about what you're trying to accomplish, not just change 20 different rules.
So one of the things that seems to have changed is that the US seems to now have effectively unlimited deposit insurance.
I don't think that's true. First of all, and the other thing about the US, and people should understand, the insurance is not guaranteed by the US. It's paid for by us. The banks pay it. Okay, there's a backup, but it's never been used, and all the money in the FDIC, which I think is $130 billion, has been contributed by insurance premiums that banks pay. But I think part of this crisis did point that out, that when a bank goes bankrupt, you kind of insure the deposits, you don't cause runs on other banks. It's another thing they should really think through how they want to handle that. We did this resolution recovery stuff is 200,000 pages long. Okay, well, I've always thought a lot of that was a waste of time. I kind of proved that. Okay, like what are you really trying to accomplish? And so we all want to be in a position where banks can fail and the world doesn't go down the tubes. That happened this time, but it caused too much consternation.
So just to be clear, you think that in future banks will fail and deposits over the insured limit will not necessarily
I don't know the answer to that. I think that, that's like if you're going to change that, you have to change a bunch of other stuff too. You can fix this thing many different ways, and you would have different outcomes and different rules. So if they want to change insurance, they have to change collateral and a bunch of other things. So yeah.
But they now seem to have, at least somewhat implicitly, have changed the expectations of insurance.
I think they've said that if it goes into receivership, that they want to make sure uninsured deposits are taken care of, which probably has been true almost throughout history.
What about consolidation? I mean, the US still has over 4,000 banks. Yeah. Sitting from Europe, there seems to be the need for much more consolidation. But politically, there's already concern about too much concentration. So where are you on that?
No, obviously they should allow consolidation. But first of all, don't look at the system as static. We have the best financial system in the world. Okay, and I'm talking about banks and private companies and venture capital and private equity and all that. And it works. It's kind of the flywheel of what makes a great economy. If you don't have a good financial system, you probably don't have a good economy. We have a lot of banks, and we have a lot of new banks. You have Ally Bank, you have Marcus, you have fintech banks, stuff like that. So there's always change. If one of the changes should be that people want to merge because they think they can compete better in whatever market they're in, they should be allowed to merge. So I'm in favor, you could argue I should be against it, but I'm in favor of allowing these banks to merge and become more competitive, at least according to them. And so they're going to have to allow it. It's a real mistake not to allow it. I would defend community banks. We're the biggest bank to community banks. We want them to be successful. But the way to make community banks successful is not to stop the merger of certain banks.
So the rules on consolidation now are too restrictive?
The rules aren't restrictive. I think what happened is there was a deal that got basically it took 2 or 3 years to get done, and that shouldn't be. The rules should be clear and allowed, and the smaller banks should be allowed to compete, and that may mean some of them merge.
So you say the US has the best financial system in the world. What about the health of the US economy? I think it was last October you said that the US would quite probably be in recession by mid-23. Even in your letter to shareholders, you talked about dark storm clouds ahead. Is the US actually now going to skirt a recession?
No,
or what do you expect?
I'm going to be different. What's skirted is that there was so much fiscal, this is my opinion, looking back, fiscal monetary stimulus that's part of the reason we're still very strong. And consumers have money, they have $1 trillion more in their checking accounts. It's been coming down, and we think sometime around the end of the year, and this is where we kind of missed, if you go back a year ago, that excess money will be spent. But wages are going up, not enough for inflation, home prices up for 10 or 15 years, stock prices up for 10 or 15 years. Even if we go into recession, consumers in great shape. That was true a year ago, that's true today. Businesses are in pretty good shape. That was true a year ago, it's true today. The storm clouds partially hit. Like I was talking about 5% rates, they actually got to 5%, inflation was too high, markets were down 20%, the IPO markets closed. So you kind of had a little bit of that, but I still think there's some very serious things in front of us. They're still out there. They may never happen, but this war in Ukraine, oil, gas, food, migration, some small nations who are struggling quite a bit, quantitative tightening, which we've never had, and inflation may go up. I think rates, my own view, rates, I think the odds of rates going higher from here are higher than what other people think. All these things may mitigate and go away, and we'll all have a deep sigh of relief. I wouldn't count on that.
You wouldn't count on that unless you think it's probable that there'll be a recession within the next 6 months?
I don't know. I don't care about it.
You said a year ago you thought it would be by mid-2023.
No, yeah, I did.
So is it still probable there'll be a recession within the next 6 months?
You know, I don't know. Look, I look at possibilities and probabilities and all that. I think it's possible. You know, and it could be very mild. It could be a soft landing. It could be a hard landing. I'm much more worried about some of these other serious things getting worse. The war in Ukraine, spreading out, nuclear blackmail. You know, if food doesn't get delivered, starvation in Africa. I'm far more worried about that than quantitative tightening. In the back of my mind, I can't get past the notion we've never had it before. We've never had quantitative easing like this before. We've never had quantitative tightening before. I think the effects of that in the market may be more serious than other people think.
And you think the Fed is going to have to tighten more than people maybe expect?
I think there's a good chance of that, yes.
Let's talk about Bidenomics. You know, the president has been out touting Bidenomics, yet his approval ratings on the economy are pretty crummy.
Yeah.
Do you think Bidenomics has been a success?
God, it's a tough question to answer. Look, I'm in favor for the first time in my life of some industrial policy for security reasons and for competitive reasons and stuff like that. I'm not in favor of adding, I think it should come with twins, like that there shouldn't be social policy around that. I think that's a huge mistake. It's going to lead to, it shouldn't be political, it should be purely economic or something like that. I think one of the things I think the American public looks at is our government competent and effective? Is it becoming too much Big Brother? And I think those are different questions than the IRA Act.
So how do you answer your first question?
And also the fiscal spending, $5 trillion of excess fiscal spending over 2 years, some to counter COVID, but some was far more in excess of that, is causing the inflation. So I don't know how you put that all together, but I think it's why people support some of the policies, but they look at the government, you know, even my Democratic friends, when I tell them about the government and effective policy and competence, and they all roll their eyes because they know that's not necessarily true.
So let's separate out the stimulus. I think we can probably both agree that there was too much of that, and that's part of what's caused the inflation. But on the other aspects of Bidenomics, the industrial policy, the bigger role of the state, you say for the first time in your life you're in favor of industrial policy. Yeah. Why? I mean, the record on this is pretty bad when you look around the world.
It is, and I think when you have it, you should be very, very cautious. I think the reason, national security, so just take chips. If you believe we have to make chips here or in a friendly, a non-adversarial place, they need help to be able to do that. That's a fact. You'll never make them profitable. That's going to be the same for rare earths. That's going to be the same for other things which you and I would, if we agreed that we're national security. I think there's some other issues that relate to competitiveness where if you want to have a competitive environment, you know, and China is using state capitalism, state capital, you know, forced mergers, they're a huge home market to compete. How do you make it fair for our companies? and your companies, so, and it may take a little bit of industrial policy, but it should be done really carefully. I agree with you. I think when they write books about this 10 years from now, a lot is going to be about how it didn't work, ineffective, companies feeding at the trough, Solyndras taking place again. And so I would caution people, yes, do it, but be really careful.
And that's what worries me, and it's why I'm interested that you're now at least cautiously supportive of it, because as a good free trading newspaper, it seems to me that the US is turning its back on many of the things that the US has championed for decades. Multilateral trade system, free trade, all of that.
And we shouldn't. I totally agree with you. I'm concerned about it. I think it's the only way to do some of the things we need to do around national security. I think all of us, including all Western countries, should have been thinking more about resiliency and security 15 years ago. China was thinking about it. We should have been doing it and therefore had policies around it. And those policies could be around R&D, they could be around tax credits to subsidize certain type of things. We do need that. There are tons of it already here, by the way. So it isn't like we weren't doing it, right?
That's the challenge. I mean, okay, let's agree that you need some of that for national security reasons, but what is the limit? I mean, Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, talks about a small yard with a high fence. And I keep asking Biden administration officials, so what's in the yard and what isn't?
You know what? No one knows how to answer this question yet. So if you ask big companies and small companies and governments haven't done this before. The American government hasn't done it. The administration, I'm not talking about this administration, it wasn't on our radar scope. Now we've got a resiliency and security issue we've got to deal with, and we should do it thoughtfully. If you take that narrow garden and you add to that equality and low-income neighborhoods and union jobs and also that, now you're getting into something which isn't about just economic policy. So that's why I'm quite cautious about it, but we do need to do it. And every nation is going to do it differently. So for Germany, it's about gas. They can't rely on Russian gas. They were told that by Ronald Reagan way back in the early 80s. So, to me, it's a reasonable thing for any country to say, what gives me security and resiliency? And are there unfair competitive things? Generally, the unfair competitive things were dealt with trade policy. But even today, trade policy, we simply don't do it anymore. We should be having real trade policy. We need to negotiate with their allies, trade and investment policies with the Western world, has a healthy trade environment, and then has, what you said, free markets, open trade, et cetera.
So how would Dimonomics be different from Bidenomics?
I don't know. I think my view is, first of all, I'm a free enterprise person. I think markets do work. I think when we talk about the flaws of the markets, there have always been some flaws in the markets, but if that's being used to get rid of free enterprise, that's a mistake. The most important part of free enterprise isn't capital, it's people. The movement of people, the brain power of people, your ability to start and think and grow and move and things like that. And so I would have growth policies. We haven't done a particularly good job in this country. To give you a number, we grew from the last 20 years something like 1.7% a year. It should have been 3%. We should be criticizing ourselves. Why wasn't it 3%? I personally believe it's because we've done a terrible job on immigration, taxation, mortgages, affordable housing, healthcare. We have some of the best healthcare in the world in terms of keeping people healthy, obesity, diabetes, teaching kids that in school. I could go on and on. Mortgages, had we done a good job, I think we'd go 3%. 3% would mean the average American would have $15,000 more GDP per person this year. That's what we should have done. That would have paid for better safety nets. That would have paid for more military. It would have paid for more schooling, whatever you think we need to do more of. And so.
But that list of things that you've laid out, it doesn't bear a huge amount of resemblance to the things that the administration is focusing on. I mean, Bidenomics, as you said, it's about industrial policy. It's about a bigger role for the state.
Yeah, I'd be careful about that. And we all agree we need to do a better job in education. Like, our community colleges and our colleges, our kids, we should be making it cheaper, not more expensive. We should be giving, kids should know if I graduate this certificate or this degree, I can get a job making $75,000 a year. We should do a better job at that. We're doing work with the community colleges in New York to give kids certificates around cyber, data, program management, financial management, that gives them a job, a livelihood. And you travel around the world, as you with the Economist know, Switzerland and Germany, those apprenticeship programs work. Doesn't mean they can't go back to college, but they work to give these kids jobs and hope. And then, of course, jobs lead to dignity, better outcomes, better social outcomes, more mobility. I think in our society, we forgot, we make fun sometimes to burger flip a job. That first job, It's the first rung in the ladder.
It matters.
That brings dignity. I would do things like expand the earned income tax credit, which is a little form of industrial policy, to negative income tax. I think it would help society dramatically to get more hands in the lower paid, who would probably spend that money to take care of their families and their neighborhoods, and like I said, better social outcomes. And I would be doing things like that. So,
let's talk a bit about the justification that even you think there is for industrial policy, which is national security concerns, particularly China. And you were in China recently, and reportedly you said that the Sino-US relationship was the most complex since the Second World War, the geopolitics around that. Henry Kissinger, I had a long conversation with just a few weeks ago for his 100th birthday, and he said to us that he thought that we were on the path to great power confrontation.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
I read that, and it's scary. I don't know. I do know that talking to people, I mean, we should be talking to the Chinese, and they should be talking to us. I tell people when you go there, the first thing should be, let's talk about your family. Then the next meeting, maybe let's talk about the hopes and aspirations for your country. And then the third meeting is, here's what, explain to us what you're doing with A, B, and C, and what we're going to explain to you what we're worried about. Let's have a real conversation. This is going to take real tough negotiations to get it right, so that you have, and I kind of agree with the concept of de-risking, not decoupling, and what works and what doesn't work. And then, of course, for America, my own view is this is about, Ukraine is one thing, but economically, we aren't around when it comes to development finance. We've done, Bob Gates talks about the symphony of power. That symphony includes development finance, it includes, communication, like describing your values and ethics and systems, and diplomacy. But I'm a firm believer, if you opened up our borders, billions of people would move here. If you opened up our markets, trillions of dollars would move here. It's not true they'd move to other parts of the world. So we should be looking at our own flaws and not always blaming other people. The Chinese are not 10 feet tall. They import 10 million barrels of oil a day. They don't have enough food. We have all the food, war, and energy we want. Our GDP per person is $80,000. Theirs is 15. Our military is the best in the world. And maybe they're caught up in a couple of areas, but the notion that somehow America has to be that afraid of China, we don't. On the other hand, looking back 15 years, we all made a mistake. We should have been thinking this national security, unfair competition, and not just hoping it all ends up okay. They've been doing that by 10 or 15 years. If you look at how they think about supply chains, industries they want to dominate, they've been quite blunt about it, which I understand. They're trying to do a good job for their own country.
But you say that you should first of all talk about each other's families and then talk about each other's aspirations. But if you're in Beijing, and I was in Beijing a couple of months ago, the view in Beijing is that the US wants to keep China down. Yeah. And the view in Washington is that China is a aggressive authoritarian regime that wants to create a world order that's kind of antithetical to democracies. I think there's an element of truth to both of those, and that's the problem, isn't it?
Yeah, I was surprised how much I heard they were trying to keep them down. That should not be our goal. Our goal should be to lift up America, do a great job, keep our Western alliances together, both for the military, i.e. Ukraine, and to counter some of the bad guys out there. But economically, we need an economic comprehensive strategy too. That's trade, investment, even like the IRA Act, which again, I support most of it. It wasn't done really thoughtfully with our allies, who looked at that and said, that is the most anti-European thing we've ever done. And sometimes they complain too much, but they're also partially right. And so to me, we got to keep that all together. And then we can do a lot of things unilateral, just like they've done a lot of things unilaterally. And how you deal with trade and WTO investments. And a lot of American industries weren't allowed to go there and own their industries at the time. It took 10 or 15 years. So we can be tough and mature. And we don't have to hold them down. We have to just protect ourselves. And there's a big difference between the two.
So the US should be tough and mature. Yeah. Is it now being tough and immature?
I don't think we've done anything yet. I mean, I think COVID has set us all back. Like the conversation stopped. So I'm very happy that Secretary Blinken went there, that CIA Director Burns went there, that Janet Yellen, I know she's on her way there now. You have to start by having the conversation and learning to trust each other a little bit, have those conversations, decide what you can do unilaterally, what you might negotiate, et cetera. And I do think it'd be worked out. The Taiwan issue, by the way.
How can you learn to trust each other if one side thinks the other is trying to keep them down? And frankly, there is evidence for that, right? I mean, what are these export controls on advanced semiconductors? They're designed to ensure that China stays far behind the US in the cutting edge technologies of the 21st century?
I think if it related to national security, supersonic missiles, I understand why we do it. If it relates to holding back the Chinese people, I understand why we shouldn't do it. That's what I'm saying. We have never done this before. So I know I've had a couple of conversations with people. We're talking about the 2 nanos, the 4 nanos, the 6 nanos. Where is it being used in military equipment? Where is it not being used? No country would give away their best military equipment to another country that they might go to war with. So that would be okay. It's just that's this narrow garden thing we have to be very careful about. And like I said, I don't think we've ever done this before. So I think we're all struggling to figure out what we actually mean by that. I think the government is, businesses are, but going and talking to each other is the first way to say what really matters, what's important, what protects the United States.
And what's your sense of the Chinese economy? I mean, it seems to be cyclically weaker than people expected, but what about structurally? Do you think we've had peak China, as some people think?
I don't know if it's a peak China. I think they've done it. They started, if you go back many years, their GDP per person was $400. They still have hundreds of millions of people living in poverty. Like I said, they don't have enough food, water, and energy, and they've done a pretty good job, annoying their neighbors. So you're starting to have countries like Japan and Korea and Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam talking about rearming. That wasn't American policy, by the way. That was their own policy, and so they should look at what they're doing too. And obviously, Taiwan as a whole, that's literally more complex.
But isn't it central to this? I mean, central to this is the risk of conflict over Taiwan and their view that Taiwan is an inalienable part of one China.
Yeah. Well, years ago, the one China was, I remember they talked about let's agree to disagree for 50 to 100 years. And that ambiguous strategy we all had worked. I think Henry Kissinger would like to go back to something like that while we have these conversations. But these issues might become issues anyway. There are a lot of issues about unfair trade, the autocratic world versus the democratic world, which by the way, there's always been a little bit of that, and how you deal with these issues. So that's why I'm happy they're all going, they're all talking, and we're thinking about it. I think the Business Roundtable of the United States, 2 of the biggest companies thinking through what policies we think should be done and not done to fix the security issues, leave free trade and open trade as much as you can, and work with development finance and with the allies, because you can't separate all these things out.
And how worried are you about it? I mean, how big do you think the risk of outright conflict is? War over Taiwan? I
don't know. I mean, honestly, I read everything people write, and I don't personally think it's going to happen in the next 5 or 6 or 7 years. And I also don't think we should be trying to hold back the Chinese people. I think that's a mistake. We do have some common interests, anti-nuclear proliferation. I mean, you want to talk about the biggest risk of the world? It's nuclear proliferation. And in Ukraine, Putin used nuclear blackmail. I don't think we've ever had nuclear blackmail before, ever. Okay, so this is very serious. Also, anti-terrorism. If we ever want to solve climate, it's going to take America, China, India, Indonesia. It's not just America policy. So there are these common interests, and
let's talk about nuclear proliferation, because you mentioned in your letter to shareholders that you were worried about geopolitical events. What are the geopolitical events other than China, which we've talked about, that worry you most, or risks?
In 1918 we said never again. In 1945 we said never again. And on February 24th, 2022, you had 300,000 Russian troops with thousands of tanks and aircraft under a nuclear threat umbrella blackmail, invade a free and democratic European nation. You've already had 400,000 or 500,000 casualties. There's 1,000 front line with 1 million Ukrainians on one side and 400,000 or 500,000 Russians on the other side. They're supposedly putting nuclear weapons in Belarus. This is as serious as you can find. Now, I think it had all the opposite effects that Putin wanted, which is NATO coming closer together, the Democrats and Republicans becoming united, Sweden and Finland hopefully joining the NATO, et cetera. So, but this is still very serious. And you look at wars, a lot of wars are in remote parts of the world. This is in Europe, and
You're telling me, I
yes,
I
and mistakes happen. Bombs blow up in the wrong place. I'm surprised that only one pipeline's been blown up, and now they're talking about maybe sabotaging the nuclear power plant and, with the food that goes from Ukraine into Northern Africa. This is serious. You and I could sit here and say, we hope it diminishes and 3 years from now we're not talking about it. It's possible it's still there in 3 years. And it's roiling, and the other big effect is it's affecting every major relationship in the world between the Western world, the autocratic world, Iran, North Korea, all of that, including trade, investment, anything related to security. So I think this is a very serious issue. We should treat it very seriously. If it goes away one day in some form, so be it. That'd be great.
Do you think the world is more dangerous than at any time in your lifetime?
Yes. I think it's hard to argue that it's not. Again, we haven't had something like this since World War II.
And that turns to American leadership.
And you talk
since World War II.
Yeah, you talk to American, Henry Kissinger. Like no one expected World War I to turn out that way. No one expected Afghanistan or Iraq to go on for 20 years. Wars are unpredictable by their nature.
So that turns to the need for leadership. And since World War II, the U.S. has been the global hegemon leader of the free world. You wrote in your article for the Wall Street Journal that the West needs American leadership. But when you look at the U.S. now, an unbelievably polarized country. The economy is doing well, but an incredibly politically polarized country. It looks like we're, gearing up for another Trump-Biden rematch. Is U.S. politics capable of that kind of leadership?
I think so. If you look at history, by the way, we've had this before. This isn't the only time. And Warren Buffett here to tell you the resiliency of America, including its political system, as it morphs and changes over time. And one of the beautiful things about democracy is we can argue, we can talk, we share information, people change their minds. If they don't like their leadership, they change their leadership, all things like that. But I think it's very important to point out, it does need American leadership. I don't mean that as an arrogant American. I mean that there is no one else who can provide it. Economically, militarily, et cetera. It should be thoughtful, mature, and it's got to be done with allies. It can't be, we can't be our way or the highway when it comes to every little thing. The IRA Act was an example of that, to the Europeans. There they go again. They just do what they want, that they feel like, without, talking to us. We don't have to win our way in every decent point, and it's got to be across everything. It's got to be economic, diplomacy, development, finance. So I would love to see us do more of those things, and I think a lot of the government members do. So.
But is there really an appetite for that? I mean, if you look back at the sort of post-war period, there was a bipartisan support for American engagement, for American global leadership. Now, if you look, certainly at the Republican Party, there's a growing isolationist wing in that party, and it's not at all clear what a future President Donald Trump might do in terms of American leadership. If you're outside America, if you're, I live in London, we're worried about this.
I would worry about another Trump presidency too, by the way, but I think there's always been an isolationist element. It took a lot to get us to World War I. It took a lot to get us to World War II. There's always been a little bit of that, but I think if you go to Washington D.C., when it comes to Ukraine, it's been pretty tight. Republicans and Democrats. So when it was needed, it was there. And I think the other thing we have to explain to the American public is we're doing it for America. So of course you have America first, meaning, can you imagine someone running for president saying America second? But we're doing this for America. If America gets isolated, if autocratic nations kind of cherry pick the world on security and food and economics and development finance, if the Chinese are all over Latin America, which they are, in Africa, and we're not there, that's a huge mistake for America. So the America should be doing this for itself. We have to explain to the American public why it's important. But what they've saw also is that we spent 20 years at war and trillions of dollars, and we've made mistakes and stuff like that. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't have American leadership that we need to keep the world safe and secure for free enterprise and democracy. That, to me, should be a sine qua non of American policy.
I guess the reason I worry about that is that in both parties, there's been movement away from that. Because if you look at the way the Biden administration is describing Bidenomics, it's the president himself said that trickle-down economics had failed. Jake Sullivan says there's now a new Washington consensus because the old one failed. There's a sense that America's old approach wasn't working. And then the Republicans, as we've discussed, there's this growing isolationist wing. So the kind of thing that you are describing, I just don't see as much support for as
I think a lot of people are just throwing a lot of stuff in there saying, American leadership and the economy and free enterprise and capitalism, it wasn't working. It was working. So I think that's a huge mistake, and that somehow we're confusing national security with all these other things. Like, I don't think it's a smart thing for America to be going around the world lecturing all these other countries about stuff. I'm more in the realpolitik camp, where these countries have their own interests. We should understand that. We may not like it. We may not like everything they do. They don't like everything we do. But I would focus on security and economic strategy. I'd focus on those things that keep the Western world together. So I do understand we put that stuff lumped together. People are using every little fact they can to justify what they want to do in terms of policy sometimes around education or student lending or who uses union services, or I think that to me is just very sloppy thinking. And so, but that does not mean there aren't flaws. Like, I would agree with some of those flaws. We've done a particularly bad job in America taking care of our lower paid citizens, particularly in parts of rural America and the inner cities. That's a fact. We should just acknowledge that. What did we get wrong? Like, think of inner city high schools. What do we get wrong when it comes to healthcare? We've got things right, that we have some of the best in the world: pharma, doctors, science, hospitals. I'm a beneficiary of all of that. But we got things wrong. Too much obesity, too much drugs, too much, we got things wrong with jobs. We got things wrong. We should acknowledge those things without denigrating my country. Because I'm also against that somebody have to denigrate America because, we made mistakes. There is no nation on the planet who didn't make some terrible mistakes, and.
So when I listen to you, I hear you talking like this. I think that for a man who runs a very big, successful bank, you have a lot of ideas about public policy. Why don't you run for office?
I'm 67 years old. I think if you're going to...
That's young by the standards of presidential candidates.
I think, I've never really believed I'm suited for it. And I also think if you're going to do that, you should practice. You don't just say, I'm going to run for office. You got to learn how to run for office. I think there may be common skills between a CEO in terms of administration, management, leadership, but also non-common ones. You're dealing with a whole bunch of different issues and a bunch of different venues and stuff like that. So, I think it's perfectly reasonable people think about it. I think it's very hard to do. And in fact, if you just look at history, it's almost impossible.
Except for Donald Trump.
But he is the exception, and that may be the exception for 100 years. But every other American president spent a lot of time in politics or was a respected general, basically. He is the exception. Remember, that was the third time he ran, kind of.
That's true. What about serving in an administration?
Maybe one day that'll be in the cards, but that's not in the cards right away. But I love my country, and to me, my family comes first, but my country's right next. J.P. Morgan is down here. J.P. Morgan is my best contribution that I can do to, like we have 300,000 employees. We take care of them well. We give them opportunity. We are in 100 countries. We bank countries. We bank the World Bank, the IMF. We bank Ukraine. We bank Poland. We bank cities, schools, states, hospitals. I'm very proud of what we do. We help our employees. We help 5 million small businesses. It's unbelievable. That's my contribution.
Is there ever a tension between what's good for your country and what's good for J.P. Morgan?
Yeah, but I would always pick what's good for the country. And I think we need, I think business also, I criticize government sometimes. I would also criticize business where they go to Washington, D.C. and it's always feeding at the trough. We have tax breaks for sugar and cotton. Why? We have carried interest. Why? People going down there and just fighting for own little, I think it's a mistake. If business leaders said we can grow the economy faster with good policy, that would be far better for their business than just getting a little tax break down there.
But business leaders have become much more political of late, and in fact, kind of consciously so, right? And it was, 2019 when you were chairman of the Business Roundtable and you explicitly changed your focus from shareholder value to stakeholders. That was controversial. With hindsight, was it a mistake?
Not really. This is my view. This whole thing about shareholder value, and fiduciary responsibility was buttonholing us into a thing that the American public heard as rapacious profit-taking at the expense of employees or customers, which of course is ridiculous. If you ask any CEO, any one of them, about what they're trying to do, they would tell you, I gotta have the best products and services, I gotta keep my customers happy, I need them coming back to me. To do that, I need great employees, I need talent, I need R&D, I need these things. And even a small business participates in the community. The little bakery corner shop, takes the food at the end of the day and brings it to a homeless shelter, helps a local religious institution, a local Little League. That's called humanity. So this was just humanizing business. that we take care of our customers, our employees, our communities, et cetera. It doesn't mean the show doesn't matter. It doesn't mean you don't have fiduciary responsibility. Even the word fiduciary, the American public hears standing behind your wealthy lawyers. We don't have to stand behind anybody. We're proud of what we do. We worry about those things. That's how we do a great job for shareholders.
So what do you make of this backlash against, quote, woke capitalism?
I always ask, but what is woke? I don't know what that means. And most people, they have a hard time answering that question. I understand that people are overdoing some of this ESG stuff, the climate stuff. If you get climate right, we need all the above. We need R&D, we need solar, we need wind, we need gas pipelines, we need permitting, we need someone's got to invent carbon capture to make it more economic. We need all of it. It's not either or. And so, some of the body politic makes everything binary. It's either or. Your financial oil companies, yeah, but some of these oil companies, they are the ones who are going to make the huge investments that reduce CO2. Gas replaces coal, which is by the best way to reduce CO2 for the next 5 or 10 years. So, yeah, there's a lot of to and froing, and we just have to deal with it. We try to deal with in every state, with every client, every business. What are we trying to accomplish that's fair and reasonable? And I do think it's gotten a little bit out of hand on both sides sometimes.
So on both sides of the political aisle.
Like I said, I spoke in my chairman's letter about what we're doing for diversity and philanthropy and corporate social responsibility.
And then you said, in case you think I've gone soft, I'm still a red-blooded,
full-throated, free enterprise, patriotic American.
So where does a red-blooded, full-throated, patriotic American find a political home? I think you said a decade ago that you were barely a Democrat, and I think in 2019 you said your brain was probably more Republican, but your heart was Democrat. Which party are you closer to?
I don't know. I'm still in the same place. I think we should be taking care of our citizens. Like I said, we haven't done a particularly good job for maybe the bottom 20% or something like that, and I want to do a better job. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think a lot of policies are highly misguided. Okay, so some of these big brother policies, they create the opposite of what you would think. And I don't.
But in the end, you have to put a tick in a box. I'm not expecting you to tell me where you'll put your tick in a box, but I'll put it this way, which party has changed more and which party do you worry about its direction?
No, but then you're making parties binary, they're not. So look, I'm highly critical of the parties too sometimes. When I go down to Washington, I call them the wingnuts. Yes, they're there, but there are a lot of very smart people in both parties who I know and respect that really want to get things right. And I try to focus on that.
Focus on them. Let's just, in our last section, talk a little bit about your own leadership. What have you learned in, 23 years of being a CEO, 18 at JP Morgan Chase, about leadership?
Oh, God. I write about it every year. The things, and obviously you have to work hard and discipline, and I think analytics, over and over, people maybe they don't even get that right. How do you look at business an honest assessment? A lot of businesses we took over, they didn't look at their business honestly. It was politically, they put it together in a way that made people look good, as opposed to a deep analysis about what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong, what the competition is doing, not that you have to replicate them. It's like I pointed out many times, we could have built Stripe and we didn't. Now, we have a great company, but we should acknowledge why. What did we miss? And I can go through some of that. But then there are other things like humanity, humility. People talk about curiosity. If you're not curious, you're not humble. If you think you know the answers, you're not being clear. Like there's no chance you know the answer. And when I go on the road around the world, you're always learning about people, tools, talents, organization, and heart. People, I've always done this, but that's maybe more important to me than anything now, that you have a heart and you give a damn about things, that you actually care to try to do the right thing, that you work hard, you want to do it, that you're willing to get in a bus or an airplane, that your people know that you're going to do the right thing for them, and it's not a political thing.
What do you think your biggest shortcomings are as a leader?
For years I always made fun of myself because did I show enough gratitude, and I didn't. I was afraid because an investment bank, if I showed gratitude, that they'd just ask for more money at the end of the year. So I've gotten much better at gratitude. In fact, we had a town hall and someone asked me, how do you show gratitude to your management, your direct management team? And two of the members were there, they burst out laughing. But what I did say to them is, I'm not great at it, but they do know that I respect, trust them, I break my back for them, I think they're extraordinary human beings, I love them, that they know. Maybe I should say it more, and I do think that's true.
Do you think it takes different skills to be an effective leader in 2023 than it did 2 decades ago when you started?
You know, I think it's a mistake when people say, well, yes, possibly, you know, the world changes, but the basic, it's like, what are the principles of people? If you read the principles of humanity and good management and good leadership, they've been the same forever. That people, you know, if you're going to be a leader, the people actually want you to be their leader. You've earned the right to be the leader. They know that you're not arrogant about being the leader. It's not your way of the highway all the time. So I think there are things which will not change. There are things that do change, you know, how you deal with people and technology and communication skills and things like that, you know, presumably you get better at.
So one of the things that does seem to have changed is whether people need to be in the office or not. And you know, you're building your swanky new headquarters. That suggests to me that you're very clearly focused in the office. But tell me whether you think working from home has hurt productivity, helped it, whether we're going to have a different kind of work culture in the coming years.
Yeah, so it's not completely binary. We have 60% of people working full-time. All of our MDs are full-time. I don't know how you can be a leader and not be completely accessible to your people. I do not believe you can be a leader and not be accessible to your people. So
How accessible are you? Can people text you any time of the day
I
or
return
night?
every phone call and every email every single day. I go all over. I do town halls around the world. I do bus trips. We all stand in front when we go to our national sales achievement conference with people from branches and tellers and branch managers, and we all stand there for hours shaking hands and hugging them and
What
thanking them.
time do you start responding to text? This is a question very close to my heart. What time do you...
Well, if the papers come very early, I do it after the papers. I'm not a fanatic about following up every second and every day, and I don't carry my phone around all day, but after I finish the papers, I'll read my mail. I'll respond to the ones I need to respond to. And but I was talking about something else.
Yes, working.
Oh yeah, so 10% we're always at home. We've had certain sales jobs and certain service jobs, and it's the other 30% where they're currently at 3 days in the office. But I tell people, acknowledge what doesn't work. It doesn't work for younger kids in apprenticeships. It doesn't really work for creativity and spontaneity. It doesn't really work for management teams. My management team meets, and we're here all day. We're going back and forth when we spoke about, you know, following up on issues and stuff like that. So there are real flaws. And, you know, certain jobs you can track productivity, other jobs it's very hard to do that. You know, to the extent it works, I'm okay with it. If it doesn't work, I don't mind getting rid of it either. And we're not going to make that decision because we're pandering to employees. That is not the way to build a great company. It's also in free enterprise, you could try one thing, I can try another. I completely understand why someone doesn't want to commute an hour and a half every day. Totally got it. Doesn't mean they have to have a job here either. So, you know, we'll figure it out over time, but it's got to work for the company and more importantly, the clients. If it doesn't work for the clients, it does not work.
One of the
and so count me as a skeptic, by the way. So
I'm putting all that together suggests that you're a bit of a skeptic of working from home. One of the hallmarks of a great leader is also to know when to go. And you now have, I believe, an incentive package that suggests that you ought to stay until 2026. Is there a risk that you stay too long?
Yeah, there's always a risk. So it's totally, my board meets without me every single time, which I think bothers I know you guys in England are obsessed with compensation and separating chair and CEO.
We're very bad at compensation compared to the Americans.
Exactly. But the important thing isn't that, because my lead director has all the same authorities as the chairman. The important thing is, does the board meet without the CEO? That one thing. And, you know, Dodd-Frank mandated it once a year. We do it every meeting. So they can talk about, what did Jamie say? Who do you want to meet? They meet all the senior people. They are told everything. They visit people. They call them up. They want to know. The succession is their job. They know, and I agree with, that when it's time for me to go, I go.
But isn't it also your responsibility?
Yes. But at the end of the day, it's their job. So I can recommend, I could think this, but we talk about everything. Every meeting, we talk about succession, both the hit by the truck, and then, you know, the 3 or 4 or 5 years out, and then even beyond that, so that you're always thinking about it. But, you know, if I thought I was going to lose the right person today, I'd rather leave and give that person a 15-year run than stay and lose them. And they know I think that. You know, I'd be fine if I don't have this job. You know, I love it, but it's, you know, I don't know. I'm going to write, teach, invest, work with some partners, maybe this idea you and I are talking about, maybe public policy better. So I'll be fine. You know,
so I
won't be able to do all the things I do here, but I'll be fine.
Whenever you do leave, you will be undoubtedly the best known, most successful head of JP Morgan since John Pierpont Morgan himself. What do you think your legacy will be?
I don't know. All I ever cared about my legacy is that people say we're going to miss the son of a bitch, and he made the world a better place while I was here. I don't want to have one. I always, whenever when CEOs say you got to make a name for yourself in an area, I always say sell the stock. This is a big, complex company. We do a lot of things. We deal with 60 million consumers. We have to do technology right, and people right, and I want to help Ukraine. I want to help the world. I want to get public policy right. So companies do corporate social responsibility. So we do our own stuff around work skills and financial education, lower income neighborhoods, and all these various things we do around the world. But public policy maybe will have a more important effect in JP Morgan the next 30 years than anything we can do directly, which is why we spend time in Washington on mortgages and skills and healthcare and all these other issues which are so critical.
Whatever it is, I'm sure you'll have a big impact. Jamie Dimon, thank you so much.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.